Welcome friends to another r/malicious compliance video. As always, if you enjoy these videos, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. And our first story of the day is by Not Really Lucy, Parking Brake. One of the reasons my marriage works is that my husband and I have very similar opinions most of the time. One of the most notable exceptions to this is the parking brake. When I learned to drive, I was taught to use the parking brake every time I parked. Once I got my license, I learned that not everyone actually does that. I made a conscious decision to continue to use the parking brake for every park. It's better to use it when it's not needed than to forget it when it is needed. Also, building the habit of taking the brake on and off means I'm less likely to end up driving around with the parking brake on and eventually needing an expensive repair. My husband only uses the parking brake when he parks on a very steep hill. Parked on any hill, he turns the steering wheel so that the car rolls if it will roll into the curb. He actually does what a lot of people do, including my driving instructor. He turns the wheel, then lets the car roll until it's touching the curb. He claims this is extra safe. I don't think it's any safer than just turning the wheel. Tires are expensive and it's unnecessary wear and tear on them to leave them smashed up against a curb. We've come to an agree to disagree about the parking brake. He sometimes grumbles a little when he drives a car that I drove earlier and has to remember to take the brake off, but it's not really any kind of big deal. Well, my stepdaughter learned to drive. Her dad had been the main driving instructor, but with his blessing, because I'm not her actual parent, I've done some driving instruction too. The first time the emergency brake came up, we explained that her dad and I had different habits about how we used the parking brake. We told her that for simplicity while she was learning, she should do it dad's way, but when she's out driving on her own, she'll eventually develop her own habits. This was about a year ago. Today, my stepdaughter drove and it was the first time she parked on a hill by a curb. It was a slight hill, but definitely a hill. She parked by the curb and asked if she should use the parking brake. At the time, I said yes, and her dad said no. He instructed her to turn the wheel and let the car roll into the curb, and that was good enough. I let him finish this instruction. When we got out though, I said that I prefer to use the emergency brake and not press the tires against the curb. I didn't say that his way was wrong, I just shared that I do the same parking job a different way than her dad does it. This is a normal thing we've done throughout her learning to drive. Well, I don't know. My husband must have gotten up on the wrong side of the bed because he got a little salty and said, "Maybe you should read the driver's manual and see what it says about parking." I was a little annoyed, but I was going to let it drop. However, once we got where we were headed and I had a minute, I thought I should do just that. We currently live in a different state than the one I learned to drive in, and I've never read the driver manual for this state. I have no idea what the laws or suggestions about parking brakes are. So I pulled up the state manual on my phone and looked at the section on parking. Boom! Right at the top, you should use your parking brake every time you park. In the section on hill parking, it says to turn the wheel, but it doesn't say to roll your car until the tire's up against the curb. I showed this to my stepdaughter, and she found it hysterical, especially since her dad did learn to drive in this state from his dad, who was a retired cop, although he also rarely uses his parking brake. My husband just rolled his eyes at me. I went on to tell my stepdaughter that the most important thing is to secure her car in some way when she parks on a hill. Her dad and I are both good drivers, and as she gets more experience, she'll figure out the things that make the most sense to her. So ladies and gentlemen, in your opinion, is turning the wheel towards the curb and just kind of parking up against it good enough? Or should you always pull the parking brake? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. This next story is by Bogo0814, The Time I Made a Navy Officer Repeat Himself. Way back in 99/2000, when I was a senior airman, E4, on my first long-term TDY, I worked in the request for information section. I basically took the RFIs, verified them, validated them, corrected any typos, and then sent them off for collection. There were a lot of liaison officers for the different airborne collection platforms, various services, and/or coalition partners who we always coordinated with. One such liaison officer was a Navy commander. Things may be different now, but back then, Navy officers did not talk to lowly enlisted, so there's a few things working against me. He's a Navy officer, he's a pilot, and I'm lower enlisted. One day, I received a request specifically for collection on his platform, but I was confused about what they were asking for and wanted to make sure the wording was correct before submitting the request so it wouldn't get kicked back. I say, "Sir, I have a couple of questions about this request. Do you mind taking a look at it before I submit it?" The commander said, "Why are you talking to me?" Me, glancing side to side, said, you're the Navy liaison officer and the request is for your platform. He says, you need to route that question through your supervisor. I say, you want me to ask the major to ask you the question? He says, yes, all communication between us should go up your chain. I say, yes, sir. I went back to my section and asked my army major to ask the commander about the request. The major says, I have no idea. Ask the commander. I say I did. The major asks, what did he say? I tell the major that the commander told me to ask the major to ask the commander. The major says, are you freaking kidding me? I say, nope. Everything has to go up the chain. The major says, what the freak? He takes the request and goes to talk to the commander, comes back with the answer and says, that guy is a jerk. No argument from me. Fast forward a few weeks, it's a Sunday and I'm the only one working in the office because we always tried to have minimum manning on Sundays. The commander comes over to talk about an RFI, but he doesn't ask me. He asks the Air Force technical sergeant that sits behind me, but the technical sergeant doesn't work in the RFI section. He just works in the same area and it's a crowded area, so the backs of our chairs are less than 6 inches apart when we're sitting at our desks. So the commander spends a good 10 minutes explaining to the technical sergeant what he needs, only for the technical sergeant to tell the commander he doesn't work in the RFI section. He just sits there, and the commander needs to ask me. The commander says, well, cue malicious compliance. I remain silent. The commander says, airman. I turn in my chair and say, yes, sir. He says, well. I, with a pretend confused face, say, well, what? Commander says, I just explained the issue to technical sergeant. I say, yes, sir, but you weren't speaking to me, so I wasn't paying attention. Commander mutters under his breath and repeats everything he just said. I say, I'm sorry, sir. I'm not authorized to answer your question. You'll have to talk to the major when he comes in tomorrow. Commander swears and stomps out of the office. Monday rolls around and the major strolls in with his morning cappuccino. He asks me, did you really tell the commander you weren't authorized to address his issue? I say I did. He says, but you are authorized. I say true, but if everything has to go up the chain, then logically it should have to come down the chain as well. The commander left a month later, and his replacement was much more laid back about who we talked to. I think the bottom line here is, regardless of the structure, if your plan is to be a technical jerk wherever you can, then I don't think you should be too shocked when people are being technical jerks back to you. This next story is by Yankee Moose. If you don't want to wait, you can go home. Okay. Short but sweet. A few years ago, I started with a new company as a front office/customer service associate. Thanks to the issues of our IT department and our store being brand new, there were still issues with the time clock. I was also very new and had little issue following policy and rules to keep myself out of trouble, since I knew our corporate asset protection person very well. I also watched her fire someone on the spot for breaking a company policy, so getting on her bad side was not on my to-do list. One day, I come in about 10 minutes early and it said, manager override required on the time clock. So I found the nearest CSM up front and had them page a manager on the in-store radios. A coworker says, hey manager, OP needs to clock in, can you come up front? Pause. The coworker says, manager said they'll be about 5 minutes, but to go ahead and get started. I say, policy says no working off the clock, so I'll go sit in the cafe and let me know when they come. The coworker says, seriously? I say, yup. The coworker keys her radio and says, hey manager, OP said they'll wait for you cause they don't want to work off the clock. Pause. Coworker says, manager said you can get started now and they'll adjust your time later, or you can go home. I say, did they actually say that? Coworker says, yes, either get started or go home. I say, alright, have a good day. Got about 3 phone calls on my way home, which I promptly ignored. The best part about it was 2 weeks later, said manager was asked to go to another store in the chain for reasons that no one really knows why about, and as far as I know, doesn't work for that company anymore. When our asset protection person caught wind, they called me and said next time that happens, call them directly and it'll be handled immediately. I kind of agree with OP, more in just the blatant sense of, if I can't be registered as on the clock, I don't want to put that guarantee in your hands just so it's possible that you can screw me over on it. And honestly, it seems like a pretty straightforward thing to me. Our next story is by eGrant03. She did do what he asked her to do, technically. My dad frequently took my 2 older brothers, the only boys, out camping. He was former military and really into that kind of thing. Between scouts and at least 1 to 2 times a summer, it seemed like they were frequently gone. So once, my mom planned an at-home spa day for me and my 3 sisters. She worked full-time, but it was my dad's job that paid the bills. My mom was not a girly girl, but she was planning on going to the dollar store and spending $20, $4 per each person, on nail polish, hair clips, and accessories for girls ranging like 16 to 8-ish. My dad gave her a standard lecture about how they're broke and it wasn't needed, and we, the girls, didn't even like that kind of thing, although she had already told us and we were all looking forward to it. So like many things, Dad didn't see the need for it, and it didn't happen. But he would frequently spend over $50 each for snacks and foods for the boys each camping trip, in addition to taking them to a local buffet on their way home. All told, with site fees and gas, over $250 a trip. My mom wasn't having it this time when my dad had left her with a note with the supplies he needed her to pick up for the trip. Typically this wasn't a problem, as she worked at a local school, so she got out by 3 or 4, and he had a 45-minute commute one way. But she wasn't excited to be spending money to allow my dad to spoil the boys after just getting a lecture on overspending just the night before. Now, she tried not to let the kids suffer from their fights, so she got their food with one malicious compliance. My dad had asked her to pick up 2 bags of marshmallows for s'mores, which she did. When he got to the campsite and unloaded the food, he noticed 2 half-sized bags of mini marshmallows. And to make it more of a screw you, they were flavored and did not work with s'mores. When my dad got back, he asked her about it, and she simply replied, "They were cheaper and on sale." We never did get our spa day, but my dad was more open to the occasional splurge when he was out of town. He also cut back on his own spending and only took the boys to the buffet on the way home if they were going to be late or coming from out of state. OP later tried to clarify that this wasn't really a sexist kind of thing, more so just a mindset thing where camping and outdoors and all this stuff was seen as like a scout and a skill, where, spending all this money on that stuff seems worthwhile. Whereas to somebody with that mindset, makeup and spa days and stuff just seems, frilly and not necessary. By the end of the story, it does seem though that they understood that once in a while, a treat like that is maybe more of a need than you realize. People all need a good relaxing day once in a while doing some kind of fun activity. And our final story of the day is by Klapok. Safety first, feel the burn. I was working in the oil and gas industry. My job was to do the engineering for new works and then go on site to do the job. For the sake of simplicity, I'll leave all tech out. So here comes the day I get my first real job at the company, even though I had prior experience in other toys of heavy industries. I do great work presenting how I intend to do the job. Everyone's impressed by the solutions I find. I put it down in a procedure, submit for review. Point of importance, I still hold uncompleted structural drawings that will get modified later, but the order is to get the dock out as the project is late. Anyways, the procedure is already all the harder stuff completed to give something to chew to the client, and the review for that will be thorough. All departments look at your procedure, including quality, safety, project, structure engineers. Now at one moment, a rigger needs to install something high and use heavy tools, around 15 kilos. I sketch a platform to stand on with some access stairs, send it to the drawing office with a work order because it's unplanned costs. My boss comes back with the work order saying this is plain stupid, the operation is easy, guys are strong and used to it, they'll be able to do it. We argue a bit. I tell him at one point the guy will work beside the ladder while carrying a heavy load. I'm not doing this unless he orders it. He orders it. Review goes fine, as it's critical. All departments went through the procedure, including quality, safety, project, structure engineers. Safety misses it. Was a good job as he stated it. Installation comes by. I tell the guy about the order. He goes silent as my boss has good field cred. He thinks the boss is probably right. Time passes. Summer comes by and passes. The client is even more unhappy. Corporate's on our butt. All installation and construction issues for phase 1 are finally solved. Point of importance, in that line of business, nothing starts as long as your procedures are not out. Field time is too expensive. My procedure had come back with no noteworthy comments. I updated the drawings, and being a second issue with only minor comments, it goes through the fast lane. Fast as one tech reviewer and project manager. The first lane had all departments look at your procedure, no major comments from the customer. Second procedure goes promptly out. Final stretch, yard date in sight, final safety review before customer safety review before ops. Everyone who's someone around the project is there. Project manager, his boss, head of HSE, my boss, his boss, whom I'll call Bloodletter. That guy is said to have deep diving compression issues which caused his behavior. The guy before me had several mistakes for his work. Bloodletter shredded him to pieces. Got yelled at for a continuous 10 minutes. My boss, his boss, shredded him too. My turn. I present the planned ops. One guy raises issue with the ladder and climbing with heavy tools. Bloodletter looks at me, calmly asks why I did this. Rear legs ready to pounce, claws out, 6 figures of money loss in his eyes. The guy before had seen an appetizer. His mistakes were, after all, hard to foresee. My boss asks me how in the freak did I come up with this. I look at him and state, I had planned a platform with access at this point, and you ordered me not to. Bloodletter pounced. The shredding lasted half an hour. Without moving, my boss was soaked, despite the air conditioning making air too dry. His face was dry, hands clenched. I was jubilating each time he looked at me. If there was ever a time where you could say, I told you so, it was probably a moment like that. OP just did their best and did what they thought was good in the safety of the project, and the boss just kind of trampled all over that and sabotaged themselves. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So of all these stories I've read today, which is your personal favorite and why? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you haven't, if you could like this video and subscribe, it would mean the world to me. Whatever you do, whether it's liking, subscribing, or just viewing the video, it all helps this channel grow so very much and I appreciate the heck out of that. So until next time, I'll see you all here tomorrow with some more stories.